Well, I love Calvin, but alas, he would not find this loophole in the AP Art History exam. Still, there are some tricks, or better put, some studying and test-taking strategies that can improve your odds on the long essay. So today we're going to look at the first long essay that appeared on the 2018 AP Art History exam. Last year, Ms. Jacobs and I participated in a webinar where the head AP Art History grader talked about some of the issues that she and other graders observed in student responses to this question. We're going to share some of that information with you and in the process help you succeed when you tackle this as your first long or 30-minute essay of the year. So it's May 8th, 2018, and our art history students opened the second part of their art history exam, and this is what they saw. The first 30-minute essay, and this image and question. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but that's from way back in September. Did Mrs. McConnell even talk about that work? But really, you remember more than you think. Pergamon and 175 BCE, that has got to be Hellenistic Greece, right? Look at those writhing bodies and diagonal lines. Definitely Hellenistic Greece. So what's the key term here? Which noun or nouns tell you where you need to focus? Battle or conflict. The College Board's going bloodthirsty on us. But now comes the harder challenge. You don't get images for the two comparative works they suggest you write about. You have to conjure these works up from your long-term memory. Maybe, if you studied hard, your short-term memory. Here I'm helping you by conjuring these images up on the screen. The scene on the far left is not a required image of the column of Trajan, but it should help remind you of what the panels on Trajan's column looked like. In this podcast, however, I'm only going to walk you through comparisons with the palette of Narmer. The bad news is that on your essay test, we're going to ask you to make comparisons with the other work on the list, the column of Trajan. We've put resources up on Moodle to help you review and learn more about the column of Trajan. I'd also note that your review quiz includes lots of questions on this work, including some that the disembodied voice herself struggled a little with. By the way, while this was not one of the College Board's suggested choices, so many students chose this work to write about that the College Board included guidelines for scoring it. We're not including it as one of your essay test options because we want you to write about one Greek work and one Roman work. But I do want to note that this work was okay because it came from the ancient Mediterranean. As we'll see at the end of this lecture, one big mistake many students made in 2018 was that they chose a work outside the list and outside the required period, which was a big and costly mistake. So now that you know that you're thinking about battles, you have three basic tasks, conveniently broken down in 3 paragraphs. First, you have to explain subject matter or content. What's happening here? Second, you have to talk about 2 similarities and or differences in what you see. That is, in visual evidence. And you need to explain why these differences occurred. 2 is all that's required, and you can discuss either similarities, differences, or one of each. But I think it's smart to talk about both similarities and differences and to aim for at least 3. Why? I've told you this before, and you'll hear it from me again throughout the year. You don't lose points if you get something wrong. 3 answers simply improves your odds. Third, and this is the hardest part, you have to talk about how the imagery reinforces concepts of power and leadership. And there's a trick in the third part of the question. It tripped students up if they didn't read carefully. So what is it? Any guesses? For the third question, you are only exploring a similarity. You get your second point on this question by giving specific contextual evidence for each work in support of that similarity. In other words, you have to talk about the cultures here. Note the plural, cultures. You must discuss both Hellenistic Rome and, in the example we're playing out, ancient Egypt. In your essay in class, Rome. So this is where students across the country tended to mess up. They managed the visual evidence pretty well. A lot of them, however, bombed on cultural context. Since Ms. Jacobs and I are both trained as historians, not artists, we throw a lot of context at you. Throw it back. So let's start with the first question and the image that all students were required to discuss. What is the content or subject matter of this work? Remember, you already know you're looking at a battle. Now, if you have time, pause the video and jot down what you remember, what you might say. So what do we see? We see the gods, and especially Athena, waging war against other powerful beings. We see Athena triumphing over some naked guy with wings, pulling his head up by his curls and raising him up from the ground. We see another female figure reaching up toward Athena with what appears to be a horrified expression. And we see a winged figure flying into the scene and crowning Athena. So you can arrive at most of that content just by looking hard at the image, right? And you have this image. Remember, in AP Art history, your eyes are as much your friend as your memory. But here's more information from the scoring notes, information that would be great to include, but not necessary. The great altar of Zeus and Athena at Pergamon depicts the epic battle between the gods of Olympus and the earthbound Titans, who are often referred to as giants. They are fighting for control of the earth. In this particular detail from the Hellenistic Gigantomachy frieze, the goddess Athena is shown triumphing over the winged figure of Alcyoneus, the son of Gaia, the earth goddess and mother of the Titans. Gaia is shown to the lower right, looking on in horror and raising her arm as Athena pulls her son's head by its curls, raising him from the ground and breaking the source of his power. Nike, the goddess of victory, swoops in to crown Athena. But you don't need all of that to get the point. Talking about Athena battling other gods should do the trick. How about the content of this work? Remember, you will need to fully identify your second work, and the ECB has already given you the title. So this would be harder since you wouldn't have the image in front of you, but you'd almost certainly remember Narmer waging war and smiting his enemies. I'll bet you remember the bull, a stand-in for the pharaoh, and the stack of headless, penisless bodies as well. That's enough to get you the content point. And here's the longer College Board explanation. The Palette of Narmer is typically interpreted as commemorating the unification of Egypt. You knew that, right? Narmer, grasping the hair of a man kneeling before him, is shown raising a club to smite his enemy. Two victims are seen sprawling on the ground in the register below him. On the opposite side, preceded by his standard bearers, Narmer views the decapitated forces of his defeated foes. Multiple dead figures allude to a large number of casualties. In the register below, servants restrain two cat-like creatures called serpopards, whose intertwined necks have been interpreted as symbolizing political unification. In the bottom register, Narmer is represented as a bull destroying a walled city, referring to his great strength in battle. Okay, get one of these details right, along with the big picture, that is the contextual context, and you're golden. Oops. So here's the next question. Again, we're just focusing on the palette of Narmer. If you have time, stop and say. So here are some similarities. Both depict clearly dominant victors using overpowering physical force to subdue their enemies. In both works, the victors are calm and controlled. They're winning without any apparent difficulty. In both works, the enemies are shown in poses that emphasize their defeat and submission. Both works include imagery of gods and goddesses to express divine involvement in the battle or conflict. And finally, in both works, the victors are differentiated from their enemies by idealized form, by scale, or by placement. In other words, the victors are bigger, more central, and more idealized than their enemies. For differences, I'd look first to stylistic differences, since that rigid, formal Egyptian style is so different from the dynamic Hellenistic style. You should have plenty to say. Above all, the facial expressions, contorted poses, diagonal forms, and use of high relief all give the Pergamon battle scene more emotional intensity than the palette of Narmer. The palette, by contrast, makes use of various artistic conventions of the ancient Near East, especially the use of registers and hierarchical scale. This gives the palette a sense of calm dignity that contrasts with Athena's more frenzied victory. In the Pergamon frieze, the gods are active participants. In the palette, gods are present more as symbols or witnesses. The palette likewise employs continuous narrative, that is, the use of consecutive scenes, while the Pergamon frieze captures a single moment. And that's a lot to think about. But remember, you only need to find 2 similarities and or differences. Again, I recommend 3 to get that point. It's not that hard. Here is the final question, and this one can be hard. We've thrown a lot of power and authority at you in the last 2 units, so take a moment and think about how you'll throw it back. Again, read every part of the question carefully. You need a similarity, and it needs to be a similarity that reinforces that culture's concepts of power or leadership. But once you've got that part down, the task is really not so hard. Both works use the imagery of successful battles and heroic victors as political propaganda, serving a powerful ruler. In both works, leadership is divine or blessed by the divine. And in both works, enemy forces are depicted as thoroughly defeated, which suggests that they lack the divine favor that has been granted to the victors. So I talked about this in an earlier lecture. How do rulers throughout history use art to reinforce their right to rule, what we'll call legitimacy when we get to AP government? Well, they establish their legitimacy by winning wars. They establish their power and authority and legitimacy by showing that they have the gods on their side, and often they show that they bring home the loot. But just noting the similarity is not enough to get full points on this essay. The trickier requirement is presenting specific contextual evidence from each work. Contextual, again, is pretty much College Board speak for historical information. And you've learned a lot about history in your homework and in my lectures, even if it seems to have disappeared from your mental hard drive. So this work is a gigantomachy. It tells the story of the Olympian gods winning control over the earth by defeating the Titans. And remember what you learned in your reading. In Greek literature and art, fights between gods and giants, gods and centaurs, etc., are stand-ins for fights between Greeks and barbarians. The Greeks deeply valued their perceived cultural role as the embodiment of civilization and reason. They pretty much assumed that all foreigners were barbarians. Note that this is the same information that you read in your homework and that I focused on in my lecture. I even gave you the added example of the Centaurimachy on the Parthenon metopes. If you remember that this altar was commissioned by King Attilos to celebrate his victory over the Gauls, well, it's even better. So I'm not going to go through this whole process again with the column of Trajan. I'm mostly leaving this up to you. I have put some resources up on Moodle to guide your research, including a fun, interactive National Geographic website that lets you explore the entire column. But I will help you get started. Here to start with are the identifiers. Interestingly, and given this question, I think confusingly, this is the only College Board image in the course description. The frieze on the column has 23 layers, 155 scenes, and more than 2,500 figures. And the College Board doesn't tell us which one of these scenes they care about. So the good news and the bad news is you're going to get to choose. But you're going to need to have some images from the column in mind, or at least have some general memory of what they look like. So your first question, again, is about content. Here are a few more images that may help, and you saw more of them in my podcast, or most of them in my podcast. So this was the largest and most prominent image, the river god Danuvius, or the personification of the Danube. It's at the bottom of the column, right in the face of the people standing in front of the column. The message is pretty clear. The river god is on Rome's side, and Trajan, with God's help, rules the river. And here you see the same image in a bigger context. The Romans are loading up their ships, ready to sail down the river to battle. The god looks on. Seems to me he's approving. When you are thinking about similarities and differences in content and style, these 2 images might be good to keep in your mind. Think about some of the contrasts I just drew between Athena's battle and the Palette of Narmer. I've put an article up on Moodle entitled Trajan's War Diary. It includes several images and some useful commentary. So here's an excerpt relevant to this image. Surprisingly, there are very few scenes of actual battle. Instead, there are a large number of scenes showing construction and ceremonies conducted by soldiers, and the figures of forts, ships, weapons, soldiers, etc. Depictions of violence against the enemy are rare, but there is a bizarre scene showing Dacian women torturing Roman men. Some scholars suggest that the lack of battle scenes and the large number of building scenes is propaganda specifically aimed at the urban population of Rome, the primary audience for the column, addressing their fear and distrust of the army by depicting its warfare as one with little collateral damage and one where they do a lot of good by building things. But there are plenty of battle scenes showing off Rome's impressive fighting machine. Note that here we see soldiers stepping over dead enemies. We've seen that before, right? And here is Trajan at the far left watching a battle while two Roman auxiliaries present him with severed enemy heads. It's interesting how often we see bodies without heads showing up in art history. And remember how I just talked about 3 ways that a ruler establishes legitimacy or right to rule? We've seen 1, that he honors and is blessed by the gods, 2, that he wins battles, and now 3, he brings home loot. Think of it as a recruiting poster for the Roman army. See the world, come back loaded with goodies. So here's the rest of the question. I've talked about content. Remember that imagery is really a visual question. What similarities or differences do you see in how battles, and in the case of Trajan's column, an entire war, are portrayed in the works? And finally, the last part of the question looks for, again, a similarity, don't forget that, and for contextual or historical evidence that talks about how it conveys notions of power and authority. And I've just talked about that, right? But please don't turn off the video just yet. I want to make some closing comments about what graders saw when they read these essays in 2018. And then I want to end with some changes that the College Board has made since then that will affect how this essay is graded and how your exam will be scored this spring. So here's a very helpful summary of problems that AP readers saw with question 1. The first problem showed up in comments on every question, not just the first. Students were weak on historical context. You get a lot of context in this course, but keep in mind that many of the other deer who will be taking this exam are juniors and seniors who will have already taken AP World History, maybe AP European History too. So you still have to run faster and harder than the other deer. The second problem will get more serious later in the course when you know a lot more works. So, for example, many students chose the French painting Liberty Leading the People as their comparative work. You're going to like this painting, I predict. Students usually do. And it does show a battle scene, but it's a scene from the Revolution of 1830, which is more than 1,500 years after 300 CE and definitely not an ancient Mediterranean work, as the question requires. Now, this element of the scoring rubric is new to AP Art History, would not have been something that the students who took the essay question in 2018 would have faced. But starting with the 2020 exam, your exam, long essays will include a scoring point labeled complexity. Other history AP exams, including AP World History, which you'll take next year, have already introduced this point. And it has a lot of teachers scratching their heads and trying to penetrate the workings of the evil mind. When she returned this June from her week as a grader for AP World History, Ms. Jacobs told me that if she heard the word nuance one more time, she was going to commit an act of violence. Well, I have deep respect for Ms. Jacobs' righteous anger and for her capacity for violence. But at the risk of becoming a target, I kind of get what the College Board is doing here. I think they're seeing too many paint by the numbers essays where students stick in just enough information to satisfy the rubric points but don't really show a deep understanding of the work, and especially of ways that art historians disagree about interpretations. That's where the multiple perspectives and the alternative views come in. And you're going to work with these concepts a lot in AP Seminar next year, looking at a subject from different perspectives. But that's next year. I also think that the College Board is looking for ways to reward students who don't just meet the minimum standards to get the rubric points, but go beyond that to write something especially thoughtful, insightful, detailed, and, you've heard this from me before, long. For now, note that in this year's essays, we will always count the complexity point as extra credit. That is, points above and beyond the AP curve. It's something to strive for by writing more, by talking about different interpretations, and simply by writing a really, really good essay. So, good luck.